It's your fault, or is it? Question mark. It's interesting how psychological and psychiatric services seem to hone in on the individual and their immediate environment. Now, I'd just like to define a few things before we go forward with this. I mean, psychiatric and psychological conditions can be broken up to two major categories: endogenous and reactive. Endogenous are those which are possibly linked to DNA inheritance. Major conditions like schizophrenia, severe depression, bipolar disorder. Then there are reactive disorders, where people react to noxious situations and environments, and they react by becoming anxious, even suicidal or depressed. It seems, I mean, I've been a medical practitioner now for over 50 years, and what I've noticed over the years, especially over the last 2 or 3 decades, is how individuals are divorced from reality, from the reality at large. How most reactive psychological and psychiatric intervention is based on modifying the behaviour of the individual. Now, to a significant degree, this makes sense when you find yourself in a situation where you can't change the everyday reality of that particular individual. But the reality is, what we've seen over the last few decades is quite dramatic increases in anxiety, reactive depression, and anxiety-related illnesses. It may not correlate with the suicide rates, which have been relatively constant, but the amount of psychological intervention has increased dramatically in an attempt to resolve these issues. It's quite extraordinary that I think it's 1 in 7 boys under 10 are under the NDIS for a specific range of disorders. It's quite extraordinary that there are so many young people who are anxious regarding the situation they find themselves in. It's one thing attempting to treat the individual divorced from their community. It's much more difficult to try to pinpoint what is driving this mass anxiety in the Western world and developing nations which are now becoming first world. It seems to be that the increasing anxiety and reactive depressive levels in the community are related to specific situations. I'm not talking about food additives. What I'm talking about is the interpersonal relationships and the relationships which develop within the communities in a society which is based on the satisfaction of human needs without taking into account the needs of a community. Historically, Human beings have been the alpha animal on the planet because of their ability to cooperate. And if you look at First Nations communities around the world, whether it's the Inuits or Australian Aboriginals or the Bushmen, and the list goes on, you will find that their survival rate, their survival as a group, is totally dependent on their ability to interrelate. So what we've seen with industrialisation, now digitalisation, is what we've seen is those interrelationships have now been not only disrupted but destroyed, and people are trying to make do as individuals within society. It's no accident that loneliness and the resultant issues have become such a significant feature in so-called Western representative democracies. It's quite extraordinary. Here we have a situation where for a significant majority of the population, their day-to-day needs have been met, and not only met, but they find themselves in a situation where consumerism, or the ability to consume, dependent on your disposable income, plays such a significant role in people's lives. Now obviously, medications and psychological intervention do have an impact on the individual. They may be able to teach the individual ways of coping with the dystopia, the communal dystopia we find ourselves in today, where all relationships are governed by monetary concern. Just put yourself in this situation. You lose your wallet, you lose your mobile phone. There's no way you can access any resources because your ability to use a monetary system dissipates overnight. So you become dependent on the generosity of strangers, not the generosity of the government of the day, but on the generosity of strangers who may or may not intervene. Nothing highlights this more than what happens when there's a motor vehicle accident, when so many people don't stop, because it's not their concern. Now obviously, because we're communal beasts, trying to live as an individual in society has consequences. And if everything in that society is concentrated worshipping at the feet of Mammon, well then obviously these concerns become magnified. And when you interact with asocial media, not social media, asocial media, the problems are magnified. It's no accident there are so many charities in this country which are concerned about individual anxiety, loneliness. It's no accident we have a Are You OK Day. It's no accident that over 40% of the population who at some stage in their life have a major psychological issue. What's extraordinary is that people who find themselves in positions of fear in a war situation that the amount of anxiety about day-to-day living decreases. You'd think it'd be the exact opposite. So why do we find ourselves in this situation? Why have anxiety levels increased? Why do we see so many reactive disorders? We don't have to think much about it. A good life in a Western capitalist society is totally dependent on the amount of disposable income that you have. If you don't have any disposable income, your options become greatly limited. And if you're living as a day-to-day basis, where you can't exercise options with the people around you are exercising because they've got disposable income, it's normal to become depressed about the situation and anxious about the situation. The other issue that we've seen in the last 20 to 30 years is the privatisation of open space. We're seeing so much open public space where people could congregate, talk, interact, disappear, especially in the large urban centres, in the large capital cities. The privatisation of open public space has been rapidly increasing. As demand for services increases, the population increases. So a lack of public space. When you look at the education system, it is based on competition, not cooperation. It's no accident that the Victorian teachers who disobeyed their union directive to accept an offer from the Victorian state government were not only talking about wages and conditions, they were talking about how understaffed, underfunded and how overworked they felt in the public education sector. Because as we speak, the fact is that what we've seen is the public realm dissolve. The public realm is about providing services for everyone based on need. The private realm is based on a monetary exchange. It's based on creating a profit. If you're in business and you don't create a profit, the business shuts down. So with the privatisation not just of public space, but of public institutions which provide services to everyone based on need, what we see is more and more people becoming marginalised and isolated. On top of that, we have an education system which is divided into the private and public sector. Having these two competing systems where one's grossly underfunded and the other one isn't, sharpens the divisions, increases people's anxiety about their future, makes people refuse to go to school. It's not just about bullying. It's not just about interpersonal relationships within that school. It's much, much more than that. It's the fact that every human interaction in a capitalist society involves a monetary gain. So if you find yourself in that particular situation and you cannot acquire the disposable income because you're infirm or old or sick or have issues, well then there is no role for you in a Western society. I mean, people use denigrating terms like welfare, the welfare system. They don't use a term like social security, which is about, it's a two-way interaction between those who don't have a disposable income and those who do. where in order to maintain cohesion and peace, you have this interaction. So as you privatise public space and you privatise public institutions and force people to enter the private realm, that section of society that doesn't have disposable income bears the burden of that inability to access goods and services which are critical for their welfare and the welfare of their dependents. This isn't just a problem for people on social security. It's an increasing problem for the working poor, because the fact that wages are no longer keeping up with the cost of living, because we've seen legislation passed through Parliament at the federal level which makes striking illegal outside an enterprise bargaining agreement period. And the power that workers were able to exercise in the past, in the 70s and 80s, has now disappeared. We've seen tension increase in private organisations with the corporatisation of organisations. The introduction of individual contracts in so many spheres of business in order to maintain pressure on individuals working within that organisation, increasing anxiety. Now this anxiety plays itself out in many ways, through gambling, problem gambling, through interpersonal family violence, through increasing inability to access services which are critical to persons' well-being. Ask anybody who's has got an addiction, whether it's gambling or drugs or whatever, seeking help in the public sector, and how long people have to wait. On top of that, more and more people are now beginning to realise that governments are not responsible to them, but governments have now become responsible to the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. That their needs to increase their profitability outweigh the public good. At the same time, and in the education sector, especially the tertiary sector, where fees have been introduced, if people are lucky enough to survive and gain a degree, they may spend decades behind the 8 ball trying to pay for that degree. So no wonder we have issues in this society. No wonder a society which is based on the satisfaction of manufactured consumer needs produces so many dysfunctional members in the population. No wonder, especially in a post-colonial society like Australia, no wonder where people have come from all corners of the universe, that there is such little interaction. When we see political movements now growing momentum, which are having an increasing impact on minorities in this country and increasing anxiety and psychological issues amongst that group, these diverse groups. So it's not your fault. As I said before, there are endogenous psychiatric conditions which can happen to anyone who has that DNA sequence. Although we haven't been able to work out the DNA sequence, there is research which says that people have a potential to move in a particular direction dependent on the situation they find themselves in. And then there's this increasing reactive depression and anxiety amongst younger people, the very young and the very old. The very young because they see very little purpose in the education sector, which promises everything and delivers such little, and the very old, who find that if they have saved all their lives and become so-called self-funded retirees, they're spending majority of that income trying to look after needs which used to be looked after the public sector. The privatisation of the early childhood development, the privatisation of aged care, the privatisation of essential infrastructure like gas, electricity, telecommunications, the privatisation of increasing sections of the public health service and the public education sector. When, as a society, we only focus on maximising the profits of a shrinking minority, the rest of the community will suffer. Some people get angry. Some people turn that anger inwards, not understanding that ultimately this is the type of society we create, the type of things which are important cannot be resolved by individualism. That we're all part of communities, and these communities no longer exist except in name only. Obviously, even the shrinking voluntary sector, which has provided so many services over the decades, is now faltering. People don't volunteer. They don't want to volunteer. They're too busy trying to keep their head above water. They're too busy dealing with their anxiety in a variety of ways, many detrimental to the individual. It's no accident that Australia has the highest illegal drug intake per head of population than any sovereign nation state on planet Earth, except possibly the United States of America. It's no accident there are never enough psychiatric beds, there are never enough psychologists to deal with this tsunami of reactive psychological problems which have been created not because of deficiencies in the individual concerned, not even deficiencies in the interpersonal relationships they have at work or at home, but more importantly, deficiencies in a society which claims it's free, which claims it promotes individualism, which does nothing more than put more and more power into the hands of a corporate sector, so in the hands of a private sector which has been corporatised. Every single one of us is part of this community, whether we like it or not. The dysfunction which we see around us, the growing dystopic visions that we have for this country, can fairly and squarely be laid at the feet of a system which is only interested in generating profit, irrespective of the human, social, environmental and cultural costs.